This monster of land, this mightiest of nations, this spawn of the future, turns out to be the macrocosm of microcosm me, John Steinbeck. The elites are planning something big and ugly. Keep yourself aware and your friends aware. Please like and subscribe. Share these videos.
About it openly. That's the stuff that was off budget, by the way. Now we have the on budget stuff that is just running out of control. And again, this goes back to the point I made. I think the Fed has to be very careful of not being perceived, and it's at risk of being perceived as monetizing all that debt, because the inevitable fear is, and we don't see it right now, but every country that's done that has been brought down by hyperinflation and economic mismanagement. So we don't want to have an acquiescent central bank. And the answer is some of these folks in Washington, in the Senate and the House, just got to pull up their pants and be big kids about this and figure out a way to cover those costs. And of course, there is a division in ideology. One way to cover it is to raise taxes. The other is to say, well, if we don't raise taxes, we'll have more economic activity, and there the tax flows will come. Those are the two arguments that you're seeing. But these numbers are getting to be enormously large. And in a way, we're taking advantage of the fact that there's no substitute for the dollar bond market.
This is an interview with Richard Fisher, former president and CEO of the Federal Reserve of Dallas, and the current CEO and president, Robert Stephen Kaplan. They're clearly concerned about the debt. They work for the Fed, and they're worried. If they're concerned, so should we.
The only other deep pool is the euro market. And there's still little bitty doubts as to whether the European experiment really will obtain long term. But where else are you going to go? So we take advantage of it. As long as we have the capacity to take advantage, I believe our political authorities, fiscal authorities, should be addressing the root problem. You're not going to see it in an election year. And I hope at some point we get sensible leadership that will realize we're wasting away a very precious franchise. And if we depend on the central bank to deal with it, I think in the end we destroy the confidence that the world has in the Federal Reserve and our central bank.
Fisher is saying that the politicians need to stop spending. He is saying that it's not going to happen in this election year. There is no substitute for the dollar bond market. The only other option is the euro market. Recently, Lagarde has been speaking about the digital euro. You're watching the reset unfold. The pieces are being positioned.
So, Richard, you'll find interesting on an apples-to-apples basis, that 35 that Pete Peterson mentioned was approximately 45 5 years ago when I started in this job. And today it's approaching 60 trillion.
Yeah.
And your larger number would have grown proportionally. So we don't think this is sustainable. And to your point, we're relying way too heavily on the dollar remaining the world's reserve currency. And God forbid, if that ever changes, we're going to have really our hands full with paying more for our debt. And it's something we should be working hard to protect because it's so valuable, as you described. But I think we maybe rely too heavily on it.
These are Fed CEOs speaking. They're saying this is not sustainable. This is not going to keep working. There is an end, and it is near. We are going to lose the reserve currency status. Part of the plan, perhaps, but Americans will have a very different life after this happens. Prepare, my fellow Americans.
You mentioned the upcoming conflict is a digital conflict. I assume this is a reference to China. What is your perspective on central bank issued digital currency, and how important is this going to be going forward?
Study his reaction. They want him to talk about something that makes him very uncomfortable. That is why he laughed and scratched his head.
And how important is this going to be going forward? And how well placed is the United States or the Fed for this transition, especially given what the People's Bank of China is already doing in this space?
Again, Rob, you should probably give a little update on that, and I'm happy to add my commentary.
Translation. You speak first and I will follow your lead. This is dangerous territory and I don't want to slip. I will add commentary after you talk because you're the current CEO of the Dallas Fed and would be more up to date on what we can and can't talk about.
Well, we're looking at it. It's coming. And I think the Fed needs to do its work, and we need to be ahead of the curve, because whether we like it or not,
Whether we like it or not, it's coming.
it's coming, and
You can't stop things like crypto.
and this is a potential threat to the dollar as the world's reserve currency.
Let's review. Kaplan before was saying that the debt was a threat to the reserve currency. Now he's saying that also central bank digital currency is a threat to the dollar. Could central bank digital currency be the exit plan to the debt?
So I think these trends are going to emerge. These trends, which we can foresee, and other technology-enabled trends that we can't even imagine right now, those things are coming, and we need to be working on this at the Fed to make sure we're ready and adapting to it.
Crypto central bank digital currency technology is coming. It's a waiting game, but the more they spend, the closer we are.
I think you have to differentiate between blockchain technology and cyber currency. And the key is to master blockchain. It allows you to direct credit, even if you wanted to, and more specifics, and to make for a more effective monetary policy. And the Bank of England has done a great deal of work on this front.
The Bank of England is also a RippleNet partner. They also tested Interledger Protocol.
But it is an enormous disruptor.
This fundamental change is going to flip the system upside down. This is why they need to do things while they are in a crisis. While in a crisis, they can switch whatever they need to, and it's justified to prevent the crisis.
And what we've seen so far in the digital currency world is a lot of fraud and a lot of breaking into the system and disappearing money.
This is why it's not okay for citizens to use crypto. Keep your money in the system because your crypto can get stolen. It's only going to be for the banks and the back end. In case you couldn't tell from my monotone voice, I was being sarcastic.
At the Fed, we're always trying to figure out a more efficient payment system. And when I had the pleasure of having your job, we had to, for example, close down all the checking. Remember, Mark, we had to lay off people because no one wanted to use checks anymore. We were one of the last 3 check processing center in the Federal Reserve System. Well, that was a payments issue, and this is a payments issue. And how do you grapple with increasing incidence of a technology that makes it easier, but also you have to be careful you don't lose control.
Everything needs to be rolled out in a certain way. It's clear what they're doing, but the wrong move will implode the system quickly.
And no central bank wants to lose control over the money supply. So that's really the trade-off, Rob, I think, there. And we have to master better blockchain to improve the payment system and make it more fluid. That's what the bank should be doing.
Blockchain is how they're bandaging the old system, while crypto is the next-gen financial system. When the debt implodes and the currency hyperinflates, they won't have options. The blockchain-based system is an update from the legacy system. Legacy can't handle digital assets, but blockchain system, they can.
So is something that I detect recently when you look at valuations in the marketplace. We have floated the equity markets here beyond reasonable price compared to underlying value. Price what you pay, value is what you get. And the multiples being paid right now of almost any variable are very difficult to justify, but also hard to ascertain.
This is the former Fed Reserve CEO saying that the equity markets are overvalued.
Do you think that a new world trade order to replace the WTO is needed? Or should we just focus on bilateral trade agreements?
No, I mean, it would be nice to have a broad framework. As I hinted, it's going to be difficult to come up with. Most economists will tell you that if you do things bilaterally, you piecemeal the system. This was Larry Summers when I was Deputy USTR and he was Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. That was his big argument. And, to an extent, he's correct. Although you have to do what you can do to push the other people into agreement. So I wouldn't be surprised, for example, and I hope we do end up with a bilateral agreement with the British, if anything, just to help them get through this separation from the EU structure. But I would prefer to do a broader framework agreement. I just think it's going to be very difficult to deal with given the differences between Chinese ideology and our approach towards trade and capitalism.
We are going to see new global organizations that have platforms that are built off of blockchain technology. The rules will be baked into the code. Fully autonomous and AI watching it all.
They're basically following the Amazon model. They're buying market share.
Right.
They don't have to worry about, they're not making a profit. They just keep buying and buying and buying market share over time. So there's a great book out called Blitz Scaling. And I think that's their approach to doing things. And it's not just taking up the ports of Djibouti or buying into the ports of Greece. The average state-owned enterprise in China, Rob, has 15,000 subsidiaries. And that's how the CCP, the Central Committee, operates, not by just owning those companies outright, but also directing the subsidiaries in terms of where they invest. And they're all over Silicon Valley, they're all over Austin, they're all over us. And we didn't even know that they're basically directed by the Central Committee. So they're very clever. And I would just summarize by saying this. I would be doing the same thing if I could get away with it, given their ideology. They're trying to bring their people out of the middle income trap. Remember, their historic enemies are not us. Their historic enemies are Japan and South Korea. They did pull themselves without technology out of the middle income trap. That's the challenge. That's what Xi Jinping wants to do. And if this is harsh, but if you have to lie, cheat, steal to do it, they've been doing it. And in a way, we've given them the wherewithal by thinking in Bretton Woods terms. So that's a complicated argument. I feel very strongly about it.
China does not play by the same rules. There are subsidiaries of Chinese-owned businesses that branch into the United States. China's tactic is blitz scaling to get as big as possible. We need to move to a trustless system that all nations can plug into, and the rules are enforced by this trustless system. We gave them the wherewithal to do this by Bretton Woods. What he is saying is that we gave them the means in which to scale this large by deciding that the US dollar was the world reserve currency. They are exploiting the dollar as much as we are. A new Bretton Woods is coming.
This may shock our audience here. I actually think, even though I don't like the mannerism and the form of expression, that President Trump is correct. And that, what I mean by that is, you and I and people of our age, and most of the academic community still, are basing their approach to trade and international and global issues on the Bretton Woods institutional framework. I always have to remind people, the World Bank is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development of Europe. Last time I looked, Germany was pretty reconstructed. France was pretty well reconstructed. Yeah. And we still think of it in that analytical framework. And the reason I want to mention that is, working for and with Charlene Barshevsky and for President Clinton, I did the protocols for China's accession to the World Trade Organization. Yeah. And it was all based on that framework, that they're going to become more like us, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Well, I confess, horribly naive in the process. We have been taken advantage of. It's a great legal document. They've cheated on every single variable. And I confess that I was naive and sure. Hope Charlene doesn't mind me saying this, but she was naive as well. That's because we came from a different institutional framework.
A new international framework is coming for all superpowers to have a fair system. Not fair for the citizens, fair for the nations. The nations will decide how fair their system is, but an international platform will be fair, will be the level playing field.
Yeah. The WTO is the successor to the GATT. It assumes certain working principles. The Chinese don't play by those rules. The World Bank has been lending more money for the Belt and Road. They've been smart taking advantage of it. They're not a very big owner of the World Bank. They are head of the HR department, by the way, which I find very interesting in the way they staff it. And the same thing can be said for the IFC and the IMF. We need to consider and have a new framework entirely. I'm hoping that either when this president's reelected or if he gets replaced, that the people that surround them and advise them will lead us into a new path of thinking of a world that's not Atlantic-centric, but is indeed Pacific-centric, and deals with a radical difference between the way the Chinese approach things and we do. And this is a long answer, Rob, but I want to summarize. But
it's good.
Lenin had a great expression. He talked about control the commanding heights. Well, the commanding heights right now are technology. And what the Chinese are doing, they don't have the infrastructure that we inherit. They don't have credit cards, they don't have copper wires, et cetera. They're able to leap an entire generation into 5G and probably 6G eventually. And the real issue here is who will have control of the commanding heights of the digital universe.
Nobody needs to be in control of the commanding heights with a trustless system. That is the importance of blockchain. It's trustless. What good is the warmth of summer without the cold of winter to give it sweetness? John Steinbeck. Thank you for liking and subscribing. If you enjoy my work, please consider joining my Patreon.